This is why we see internationally that although there's a handful of Trump allies and dependencies that have praised the operation, much of the rest of the world is realizing that the planet's most powerful country is now essentially a rogue state.
Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro has been jailed in New York after being captured during a US operation in the capital, Caracas. Officials say he's expected to make his initial court appearance on Monday, that's tomorrow. With Maduro now in custody, President Trump has said the United States will run the country until what he described as a proper and judicious political transition can be established. Well, Professor of International Relations at Queen Mary University of London, Lee Jones, joins me now to explain the implications of this weekend's unprecedented, and we don't use that word lightly for once, events. Good afternoon, Lee.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Happy New Year, and thank you so much for joining
Same
us.
to you.
As I just said, we do use the word unprecedented a lot these days, particularly in relation to Donald Trump, but this has been unprecedented, hasn't it, Lee? Just how significant is it for a sitting head of state to be essentially kidnapped and taken into custody by another country?
It is astonishing, even if it's not quite unprecedented. So even by the record of American imperial interventions in Latin America, this is quite breathtaking. The Americans did, in fact, invade Panama in 1989 to overthrow General Noriega, the then dictator, and took him to the States for trial, accusing him of narco-trafficking. But I think the difference this time round is the brazen disregard for international law. There is just no attempt to justify the intervention with any reference to international law. It's an obvious violation of the UN Charter and the Charter also of the Organization of American States, of which the United States is a member. And I think this is why we see internationally that although there's a handful of Trump allies and dependencies that have praised the operation, much of the rest of the world is realizing that the planet's most powerful country is now essentially a rogue state.
I mean, from an international law perspective, can he, as he claims, temporarily, albeit, run the country?
No, clearly not. Venezuela is a sovereign country. And of course, the United States has no way to run Venezuela. It has not occupied the country. It's not taken over the government. It seems to be hoping that Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, who's now been sworn in as acting president, will act essentially as a Trump proxy and will run the country according to American interests. But it's not clear to me that she will be able to consolidate her power to begin with, and that she will in fact rule in the interests of the United States. So even though it seems quite likely that the Americans had inside help inside the regime, otherwise it probably wouldn't have gone quite so smoothly. Certainly the CIA seems to have penetrated the Venezuelan government quite effectively. It's not clear that she'll just be able to act as a pawn of the United States.
Well, it is really interesting because there does seem some quite contradictory reports emerging around Delcy Rodriguez. So Trump said that she'd been sworn in as leader. Also, he said she doesn't really have a choice. But then she appeared on television to demand the immediate release of Maduro and his wife. And she insisted that he was the only president of Venezuela. What can we take from those contradictory reports about what she's going to do and who she's working with?
So, yes, so Trump said that she's been sworn in and she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. And that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had spoken to her and basically intimated that she had agreed to do America's bidding. And that would imply that Delcy Rodriguez, whose brother is also the head of the National Assembly in Venezuela, are essentially American assets. And it's quite possible that she's the one that has worked with the United States to facilitate Maduro's exit. It seems that the regime may have done a deal, a kind of back-channel deal with the United States to give up Maduro in exchange for not being invaded, essentially. So the regime perpetuates itself a bit longer. That is a possibility. And now, if you've done that and you're now the acting president, there's obviously no way on earth that you would openly admit to doing that. So you would have to posture in public and whip up the public and say, you know, come out into the streets and we want Maduro back and he's the only viable president. So the fact that she's saying that in public doesn't necessarily mean that she hasn't agreed to do a backroom deal with the United States in private. But obviously it's very difficult to know
And what does it mean for Marina Corina Machado, who's the leader of the opposition? She's now living in Norway. Is this any opportunity, or could this be an opportunity to see her try to return to Venezuela anytime soon?
So at least in the short term, she and her proxy, Edmundo Gonzalez, who was widely seen as the winner of the last presidential election in Venezuela, and indeed the wider sort of exiled democratic opposition, you'd have to say they're the big losers of all of this, because Trump gets to posture as being, the big man of the Americas, enforcing the Monroe Doctrine and the Trump corollary to that doctrine. Delcy Rodriguez stays in power. The Chavista regime in Venezuela stays in power, and it's the exiled democratic opposition that are left out in the cold. At least in the short term, Trump said that Maria Corina Machado does not have support in the country to be able to take power, and her call for Gonzalez to be installed has also been ignored. Now, Trump's talking about eventually effecting some kind of transition, which may provide a space for the opposition to come to power, but that would require cooperation from the Chavista regime. And if they've done this deal to give up Maduro in exchange for avoiding an American invasion, then it's not clear why they would then sign their own death warrant and allow free elections and allow the opposition to come to power. So at the moment, at least in the short term, Trump comes out of this the winner, at least from his perspective, if you disregard the global reaction to the American intervention. The Chavista regime is a winner because it seems to have got rid of Maduro, but perpetuated itself in power and avoided invasion. And Machado and her followers are the ones that seem to have lost out, at least in the short term.
Lee, excuse me, Lee, I don't want to sound overdramatic here, and I don't think there is a way, actually, of sounding overdramatic with this particular story. But does this spell the end of the rules-based order as we know it?
I think the rules-based order has been, so-called rules-based order, has been in deep crisis for a very long time. And I think everybody is now waking up to the fact that it is the principal architect of the rules-based order, the United States, which is the world's most revisionist power. Now, I've been saying that for a very long time, and many people in the global south do not think that the United States has been some paragon of virtue and always played by the rules. I said earlier on, there's this long history of, flagrant American interventions, invasions, subversions, CIA coup attempts in places like Chile, Cuba, and then you go back to the American invasion of Mexico and annexation of half of Mexico and so on. There's a very long history of American imperialism in Latin America. So this is nothing new from the perspective of Latin America and the rest of the world, of course. America was intervening in lots of places during the Cold War. So lots of people around the world have been deeply skeptical of the claim that the United States and its Western allies have sort of upheld this rules-based order. We've sort of come to this realization relatively late through cases like Iraq, for example. But for lots of people in the world, they take quite a different view of the United States, that they're the ones that have been willing to throw their weight around and to break the rules that they've made. I think what's different now with the rise of the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, is that the United States has overtly said that the so-called rules-based order just isn't working for the United States anymore. So we've got no reason to abide by it. We will revise those rules openly. Whereas in the past, when these interventions happened, like, for example, when the first President Bush ordered the invasion of Panama, there was always an attempt to justify it as being somehow consistent with the rules-based international order. So, like, the second President Bush, when he invaded Iraq, he tried to dress it up as being a implementation of United Nations Security Council resolutions. Now, this is very different. So Trump is openly saying the international rules-based order is a crock and we don't need to abide by it, and we'll just do whatever is in America's immediate self-interest. And that's what I mean by the United States presenting itself essentially as a rogue state.
Lee, it's brilliant to get your insights this afternoon and help us pick through what is quite a mind-boggling story this weekend. Thank you so much. That's Lee Jones, who's Professor of International Relations at Queen Mary University of London.